Hello and welcome back to the Follow Your Spark podcast. I am so excited. I know I say this every time, and really I'm so excited to be having this conversation with this incredible human in front of me, Stacey Grandizio. She is an open-hearted storyteller and a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser. And to share a little preview of her story ahead of time, I'll share that within less than 3 years, Stacey lost both of her parents to cancer and changed jobs twice, which left her emotionally drained and completely burned out by the end of 2023. So she made a really brave decision and quit her job and took a leap of faith into the unknown. She decided to choose uncertainty over exhaustion and trust that clarity would come. And now she is embracing the journey, trusting the process, and allowing herself the freedom to explore and the space to grow and really find a path forward that feels true and aligned for her. And I know we are going to get into some topics and themes today that I'm sure are going to be so relatable. So I really cannot wait to dive in. And before we do that, I always like to share too how I got connected to people because it's so interesting to follow the breadcrumbs and follow the sparks. I feel like for all of us and part of all of our stories. So I was thinking about this today and thinking about how when we can pull the thread so far
Mhm.
back and where I'll start the thread is that I used to work for Lululemon, for those of you who may not know that. And Lululemon is very much a company about personal development, personal growth. That's a lot of the work that I did when I worked there, leading teams and also sometimes offering things for external people who didn't work for the company. And that's where I met someone who eventually hired me to lead a mental health day workshop for the company that Stacey worked at. So that's where we initially met very kind of briefly. And then I don't know how many months later, or maybe even close to a year later, Stacey came to an event at my house actually when I first bought this house. Manifestation magic.
Mhm.
Been working together. She's been one of my coaching clients. I've had one of the privileges of interacting and knowing with this human for over a year now. And it's just, like I said, so interesting to trace the breadcrumbs back. And I am so grateful for knowing you and so glad that you said yes to being here today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And coincidentally, the session that you had led, that was my second day on that job.
Wow.
So if I were have to started any later week, I never would have met you and I never would have got on that email list. And it was 3 years since that sort of virtual Zoom meeting that you kind of led on my second day of my job.
Well,
3 years down the line, something just clicked. I thought it was going to be a great way just for me to push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit and just a great way to meet some new people. I had just sort of pulled the plug on knocking down the tower. All right, we're going to quit the job without anything else set up. I never really thought about working with a life coach at that point, but just
mm,
because I saw that little gut instinct to just go to this. It's
mm,
nice people. That's sort of how you and I ended up working together.
mm.
So,
Thanks for sharing that. That is so interesting. And it really, and I'm sure we'll get into all kinds of moments and examples like this of we never know what following one intuitive spark, where that's going to lead. And it might seem, oh, what could possibly happen? But it's like those sliding doors, that movie or those moments of when we follow that spark and do something different or just do something because it calls us, things can open up and change in our lives that we never could have predicted or planned. So I'm so glad that I caught you on day two and we got to go on this journey together.
me too.
So the first question I love to ask people is when you hear that phrase to follow your spark, what, if anything, does that mean to you? Does that remind you of?
I think we always have those moments where we're not really sure why, but we feel like we're pulled to go down a certain path. And it can be something as small as, oh, I think I don't want to go to this Starbucks today. I want to go to that Starbucks. And you end up connecting with some random person you haven't seen in a long time. Or it's even bigger sort of a spark where it's what I felt was just, okay, this spark, this is what I feel. We're going to quit the job and although it's not what we really like doing, not having a plan, we're going to go ahead and just leap into the unknown for a little while.
Mhm.
But again, it's just that sort of little teeny tiny inner voice that sometimes we've learned to just sort of ignore and push down. But every now and then it gets a little bit louder than it normally is, and
Mhm.
sort of pulled to go in a certain direction, or change up our usual plan of the day.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So it sounds like you said this inner voice that can sometimes be a whisper, can sometimes be very loud, and it's this kind of like magnetic pull or draw calling you towards something or even away from something, and giving yourself the space to follow that. That's what I'm hearing.
For sure. I mean, it's almost just like your soul sort of whispering, go that way, or maybe take a left turn here and go that way. And sometimes our ego silences that. And sometimes we let the soul, or we will listen to it,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
Yeah. Can you think of a moment where you maybe heard that voice and didn't listen to it, and what happened, and what kind of helped you over the years get better, more willing maybe to listen to that call?
I've had a few situations where I knew in my gut it wasn't right to move forward with it, but for one reason or another allowed myself to be talked into moving forward by someone else. And in those circumstances, in the end, my gut was sort of like, I was sort of shown that my gut was right. This
Mm,
wasn't the right sort of a path to go down. But with that said, though, I think we always learn something.
mm,
And had I not ignored my gut feeling and went down that path, I could have never sort of understood that when I do get these feelings,
mhm,
um, I'm not wrong.
mhm,
I'm feeling something completely different than someone else. That doesn't mean
mhm,
that my gut feeling is wrong.
mhm. Yeah. And I know that's a big theme that you shared with me before this, of this concept of dead ends and this realization in hindsight of, okay, yes, I had this gut feeling that that wasn't quite right. And I ended up pursuing it because I got caught up in someone else's perception or what they thought or what they wanted. And then I really realized of, okay, this wasn't right for me. And that affirmation of, I see where my gut was trying to communicate with me before, and I needed to go through this experience to really get that confirmation or learn something. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, or would love to hear if you can talk more about dead ends that maybe in the moment you weren't quite able to see the perspective of it, or maybe you were in the moment. But yeah, talk to me about dead ends.
I mean, I think I've had three dead ends over the past year of just, again, trying to find that career path for me that not only fits but feels good too. And there were three things that I tried. One was just working with a career coach, thinking that I'd take my talents and my skills and I just pivot to a new industry. Working with him and all the exercises that he had me go through, they were excruciating. One of the questions he had me sort of sit back and sit with and answer were, what are the three to five dream companies that you'd like to work for? And I sort of sarcastically said to myself, none. Me, I want to work for me. And I went through the exercise and, of course, came up with five companies. One of them was me, and that was the only truthful answer. The others
Mm,
were just pulled out of the air just to get through the exercise that he was going to have me do. But
mm,
that spark didn't end up being a bonfire, and it didn't light the next chapter in my career, because through that, and I don't even like calling them dead ends. It's just you've hit that big green hedge in the labyrinth. And
mm,
now it's time to turn around and go back because you can't go any farther. But from there, I learned that I don't think that, going out and putting out my resume and interviewing and finding another opportunity where I'm just someone's employee was going to work for me at that point. So that dead end, I learned, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to pull back and we're going to start looking at some self-employment opportunities. That's what I did next. And I thought I had found something. This is perfect. I mean, I was lit up. I even started like putting plans in place to launch. And at some point there was just this nagging feeling that it
mm,
doesn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't give it a name of why it was not feeling right.
mhm,
But again, learning to trust what my gut is telling me. All right, even though we're about halfway there, we're just going to stop and we can come back to it if we want. But for right
mm,
now, the nagging feeling is just too big, too intense to move forward.
mhm.
So we pulled back again. And the last one was kind of coming up with my own business concept, going through the whole process of writing a business plan and reaching out to some people that I worked with prior in a past life to see if they wanted to sort of partner up. And at the end of the day, it just didn't pan out either.
Mhm.
But I don't really see that as a reason to be down or upset or disappointed, because now what I've learned through that process is I'm going to take that sort of business plan and just tweak it a little bit and then apply it to something else.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So, as a recovering perfectionist, like you have shared, what helps you not get down on yourself and not make it mean, "Oh, I failed," or "Those things should have worked out and they didn't." Like, what helps you see it from that perspective that you just shared?
It takes a lot of self awareness and knowing that there is a perfectionist part of me. There is a
Mhm.
people pleaser part of me. There is an overachiever in there still. And I don't think those parts of me are ever going to go away. But
Mm,
now just being fully aware that sometimes that type A person that's in me will call those failures. It's
mhm,
just really trying to be aware of this is something that I tend to do. And since I'm aware of it, now I can sort of catch it sooner.
mm, mhm.
um, a big thing. And then you don't go down that rabbit hole of having that sort of like negative inner critic just beating you up for hours and hours because what you tried didn't pan out the way that you wanted it to.
Yeah. And that self-awareness is huge, and it might seem simple to hear and listen, and so often I know I've experienced this in the past, I see it with clients all the time of seeing those, like, thoughts as the truth. Of course, it's true that I failed or I should have done better or the tape that's playing. If we don't have the self-awareness around that and can't catch it, it's really hard to even begin to imagine a different perspective because it just feels like the truth. So once you had that self-awareness, then it's "Oh, okay. I see this pattern. I see what I've been doing and this tendency that I have. And now I can ask myself and explore, do I want to keep looking at life this way? Do I want to keep looking at experiences as this way? Or could I see it from a different perspective?"
Absolutely. And that's not to say that that sort of negative inner voice doesn't find its way back in. I'm still learning to work with it. Sometimes I can catch it early and just remind that inner critic that not everything's going to work out. Remember, this is trial and error here. We've never taken this time to ask ourselves what fits, but also what feels good to you.
Hmm.
And just trying to make that inner critic understand this is sort of like this is trying on shoes. Remember, not every shoe is going to fit, or some might fit. They might fit like the length and the width of your foot, but does it actually feel good? You know,
Mhm.
so just trying to remind her that how often have you tried on shoes and the first pair was the one that you bought. So trying to have these silly little analogies that I think that certain parts of me can then relate to. It's, oh, okay, this isn't life and death. It's just trying on shoes.
Yes, and it may seem silly, and I'm also hearing it is as a way that it can break up the heaviness. Because exactly like you said, like, you wouldn't think of yourself as a failure if you tried on 5 pairs of shoes and they didn't fit. You would just think, "Oh, these shoes don't fit." And it's, wow, we can think about ourselves and our lives in the same way. There's no need to label something as a failure just because you tried something and it didn't fit. You have the power to look at it the same way as trying on shoes. And I think when you share that, like, I can hear just a lightness to it, and it's just a no question. It's not a problem that shoes don't fit. So what a powerful, and like you said, whether silly or not, way to break up that train of thought that can be critical.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's my analogy for me to make sense of it. But, someone else is kind of going through the exact same thing. Another way of looking at it is probably something that would click for them. It's almost just like my heart knows that these are not failures, but
Mhm.
sometimes the head doesn't really match up with the heart. And that was the analogy that helped the head and the heart click together and
Mhm.
understand it.
Mhm. Yeah. And I know you talked about the power of analogy. And is there anything else that helps you? Like, if your mind is kind of running rampant, how do you drop into that heart space? Is there anything that helps you do that?
I've learned that when I hate saying the word, but spiraling or spinning, I've learned to catch myself of like, okay, we're going to stop, change the channel.
Mhm.
So if I'm in my head way too much, all right, stop. Let's go do something physical,
Mm.
whether it's putting laundry away or doing the dishes that are in the sink or running a quick errand. It's trying to turn that channel. The radio station that we're listening to right now is just not working. So
Mhm.
we're changing the channel in some way, shape, or form. And that means completely taking myself out of the room that I'm in, going somewhere else, or going somewhere completely out. If I'm home, let's get out of the house.
Mhm. Totally. And I love that you shared that. And it's interesting. On a client call I had right before this, we were talking about there's different ways to change the channel, right? You can work with the
Mhm.
thoughts and you can catch the thoughts and then ask yourself, okay, I'm having these thoughts. Like, what else could I think differently? And sometimes that can be challenging when you're really in the spiral, like you said. Sometimes it can be challenging to force your brain to
Mhm.
change the channel on the thoughts. Yeah, it's not the only way. We can work with our physical bodies. We can work with our energetic bodies. We can work with our spiritual bodies, our spiritual essence. So,
Mhm.
what I'm hearing, what you pointed to, that you also have the option to switch it up physically. And just doing something else physically can help break that pattern, that mental pattern that the
Mhm.
mind is in, and maybe create some more spaciousness when maybe after that, and I'm curious how this shows up for you after you do change the channel, does that
Mhm.
help you also change the mental channel and see things from a different perspective?
Absolutely. Sometimes when I completely pull myself out physically from something, I can make a connection in my mind of like, why am I feeling this way? Or
Mhm.
uh, seeing it in a completely different way. And then I'm able to actually make sense of it. Because
Mm.
normally what happens is I just get so frustrated that I can't figure it out or I
Yeah.
can't put my finger on it. And then it just goes from there and just snowball turns into an avalanche. But yeah, once I physically pull myself out of whatever room I'm in and just do something completely different, then my mind isn't so jumbled with all those, I don't know, words that the critic likes to say.
Mhm.
And then everything starts to clear away. And then I'm able to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes people try to force solutions or force change, and when you're really in it and wrapped up in that mind drama, it's like the what's coming to my mind is like you're looking at a picture that's like right in front of your face, and it's just feels so impossible to see any way out of that. Versus if you give yourself the space to do something else, to let your mind rest for a second, then new ideas, new clarity can come through. You might be able to see things from a different perspective when it's not like right in front of your face.
Oh, I mean, again, being that type A, I wouldn't want to shut down my workday until I was sort of finished a certain task. And that led to 12, 14-hour days just because I just wanted to get everything done on my to-do list that was on my list to get done that day.
Yeah.
But you're fried. Your brain is fried. I think I read somewhere that your brain is only really able to do 4 hours of like deep work a day. I was trying to do 12 to 14 hours of deep work.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
imagine what your brain's like at 12, 14 hours in. It's exhausted. It can't really think clearly and do this deep work.
Mhm.
But again, being that type A, the input and the output was just priority number one. And
Mhm.
now learning that yes, it's nice to get done as much as you can, but if you just stopped at hour 10 and then you got a good night's sleep, woke up the next day, those tasks that I didn't get done, they would have gotten done so much quicker the next morning because it was clear, I was rested. I wasn't forcing myself to just keep going.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Where do you think the perfectionist tendencies stem from? I feel like I'm sure so many people listening could relate to this. I need to do more. The work is never done. What was it like for you?
I mean, I think it came from childhood and it was in my blood, in my DNA. Both of my parents were pretty extraordinary people when it came to their careers. And the praise that I got as a child growing up, it was always because I brought home A's, I brought home B's. And then it was sort of a joke. Oh, she never brings home C's. Our
Mm.
daughter doesn't do that.
Mm.
And just seeing the reinforcement, uh,
Mm.
positive reinforcement that I got from, the overachievements, the A's and honor roll. And
Mhm.
it was really just getting the recognition from those sorts of things that
Mhm.
everybody wants to get recognized and praised. So that's sort of like a connection that I made very, very early on of
Mm.
I'm noticed, I'm seen, I'm praised when I bring home A's or I achieve something in my schooling and then afterwards in my job careers.
Mm,
So it's learned, and then it's I think just society in general
yeah.
right now, everything is just input, output, always be hustling, always be grinding. That's tough. That's a tough concept for even me to let go of. Always be hustling, always be grinding, because that's how I sort of defined myself for such a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But that always be hustling, always be grinding completely burnt me to a crisp.
Mhm. Yeah. How do you see your identity has changed? Or like you talked about, like this kind of used to be your identity, and now that you took that leap of faith, you left that behind, and now you're continuing to find your way on this new path that looks completely different. How has your identity needed to change in the process? And what do you believe about yourself or life now?
When I first kind of started this, really just diving into myself, I noticed that I could not wrap my head around the concept of being okay if I was disliked,
Mm,
and having some time to pull back and look back at some of the things that I did to be liked. I mean, just the decluttering process that I've done over the past year of all of these clothes that were in my closet that really truly weren't my style, but it was just part of the costume, part of the mask in
mm,
order to be liked and accepted. And if it was in a career sense, be noticed, promoted, given raises. So that was probably the hardest concept, is just
mm,
realizing that, wow, I really do have this need to be liked. And
mhm,
if I'm not liked, it's my fault.
mm,
I did something, I said something, or I didn't do something, or I didn't say something, and I was the cause of it.
mhm,
So over the course of the year, just kind of getting comfortable with the fact of, if I want to find something that really calls to me,
mhm,
um, not only fits but it feels good,
mhm.
it may not resonate with everyone that's in my life right now.
Yeah.
And to understand that it's not my job to make them understand me,
Mhm,
and to be okay if they don't, if they aren't behind me.
mhm.
So, and again, some days I'm cool with it. Other days I still kind of like get a little,
Yeah,
loss of breath.
yeah.
Um, but again, I mean, I'm trying to sort of unlearn a behavior that's been there probably since I was a very, very young child.
Mhm,
To remind, and to also just keep reminding myself to be patient. This isn't something that can be undone and rebuilt in 6 months.
mhm. Yeah. And not only your own life, like when you think about just humans and what has us feel safe, we feel safe when we're part of the tribe. We feel
Mhm.
safe when we belong there. Like way back ancestrally, it was life or death to
Mhm.
be surrounded by people who could protect us, who, we could be surrounded by and supported by. So like you said, it goes deep, this programming. And knowing that it goes deep, what helped you begin to make that shift from letting go of the wanting and needing external validation for this sense of safety to being willing to make choices that maybe other people wouldn't like?
I think I had probably two sort of gut punches when I really pulled back and started to take a look at some of the choices that I made. And I think the biggest gut punch of all was, you would ask me what my core values were, and I couldn't answer you. I think I had initially started like rattling off like a bunch of stuff. And when I stopped to take a breath, you very gently and lovingly pointed out that I had just mentioned a bunch of things that I was good at,
Mhm.
and values are a little bit different than that. What's important to you? And then I was speechless and I couldn't answer. And that night I thought about it and I was like, wow, it made sense why I couldn't answer you. And it was because I had put everybody else's wants, priorities above my own for so long. I really had no idea what I wanted. It
Mhm.
was just almost, what you want is what I want. What's important
Mhm.
to you is important to me. Everything that you need to get, you want done, that's urgent to me.
Yeah.
So just not being able to say what my top 5 values are was just scary to me.
Mm.
Pregnant. I mean, at my age, I should be able to rattle those off really quick. And then also too, just this I mean, the people at Plato's Closet in Uptown Cheapskate know me by name and recognize me. And it's, every time they see me, it's, oh, thank God you're here. We need you to help us stock our, our inventory of just all the clothes that not only I bought as a way to sort of play that part, also the clothes that I bought at 12:30 in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, because I was just so anxious and stressed out, and
Mm,
my way of calming myself down.
yeah. So what I'm hearing is like you spent the first chunk of your life learning how to please other people, how to live up to these external expectations, how to get the A, how to do all of these things externally. And then there came a point where you realize, wait a second, I haven't spent the time on the inner work. Like
Mhm.
I've been spending all this time on this outer work of how to check boxes and meet expectations and do a good job for other people and other things. And there hasn't been the same amount of time and attention on asking myself, what do I want? It takes time and space to answer that question. Like you said, of like, it should be obvious. And if we don't actually spend the time to reflect and get to know ourselves, it can be very easy to just get caught up in the programming and what we're used to and what society has taught us to do because we don't even know. We don't even
Mhm.
know who we are, what we want. So it sounds like there was that tipping point of, again, like with the awareness of even just catching, like, wow, I can't answer this question.
Mhm.
That's interesting. What's going on there? So being able to just have the awareness sounded like it was a breadcrumb to continue following that path of, okay, let me explore this. Let me get support and ask myself these questions and really spend time answering them.
And I think that sort of question that I couldn't answer, it helped me to understand I need to focus on this more intensely first. What do I want?
Mhm.
What's
Yeah.
important to me? And I'm never going to figure out that next career move until I do all this first, because those are the roots of the tree. If those roots are not strong, there's no way that I'm going to, be able to grow up and have branches that reach towards the sky.
Pausing this interview for a moment to say, if you're anything like my coaching clients, I'm guessing you too want to live your most authentic, self expressed life. A life where you are boldly sharing your voice, your gifts, and pursuing your passion and purpose. You might also be familiar with the flip side of that energy that can get caught up with fear, overwhelm, and anxiety, and have a voice in your head that sometimes tries to convince you that you're not capable and you should just stay here and play it safe because really life is fine. But I know you're not here to live a life that is fine. I'm guessing you're listening to this podcast because you have a deep yearning inside for something more, something bigger for yourself. You have big, bold dreams and you want to pursue them because you know when you do, it not only positively impacts your own life, it sends a ripple out effect that uplifts everyone around you. If that's the kind of life you want to live and you're ready to stop making excuses or waiting for the perfect circumstances and finally bet on yourself, I have something for you. I'm hosting a free masterclass called The 5 Keys to Bet on Yourself and Blaze Your Own Path. It's happening in the powerful eclipse portal in the week of March 17th, in between the lunar and solar eclipses. This is a super potent time to transform, to leave behind old chapters and old ways of being, and step into your next level self. If you're ready to claim the life you know you're meant to live, join me. You can get all the details and RSVP at ginacasbaro.com/bet on yourself. Again, that's ginacasbaro.com/bet on yourself. All one word. All right, my friend, if you're feeling that call, I cannot wait to see you there. And now let's get back to the interview. 1000%. And I know that can be so hard for people to take that pause and not just rush straight into what's next. Like you said, of like you kind of explored these different
Mhm.
career paths because and tell me if this resonates of that part of you that's like craving the safety and craving the knowing and of like, okay, to go back into that habit of just being in action, productivity, achievement, like that's what feels known and comfortable and familiar versus it takes so much courage to press pause and make time and space for the inner work. And I get that people's circumstances are different and not everyone can
Mhm.
quit their jobs and do all these things. And there's always some kind of way to make time and space. So just
Abs-
acknowledging the courage that it took.
Oh, I appreciate it. I mean, look, I'm very much aware, and I'm very grateful that I had the support of some really important people in my life that said, if this is what you got to do it. I know other people's circumstances, just financially, kids, husband, spouse, wife, whatever. It's tough to sort of like down everything external so you can do this work. This is just what I thought needed to happen for me.
Mhm.
But you have to make a choice, like, even if it's just a couple hours a week or just on a Sunday, like this is all the stuff that you really sort of focus on. There is a way to make time for this.
Mhm.
You know, I decided to make a lot of time, but there's always a little bit of time that you can carve out.
Yeah. And let me ask you too, before you kind of took this leap or anywhere in the process, were there voices that told you, oh no, you don't have time for this. You can't do this. This is impossible. Was there ever a voice like that?
It wasn't a voice of can't do this, it's impossible. And now I'm aware of this behavior. When it's something that is hard for me to look at, I'm sure we all have those commercials that come on where it's just like, oh, I don't want to see that commercial, just turn off the TV. That's exactly what I would do.
Hmm.
So even going through this process, I saw where I would figure or find out ways to sort of push pause on some of
Mm.
this kind of heavy work, because it is heavy work. Sometimes you recognize or start to see parts of yourself that you really don't like.
Mhm.
And that's when we just want to glance at it and then run in the other direction.
Mm.
We don't want to actually like sit there and really stare and look in the mirror and figure out what's going on here. Yeah, that's the tough part.
Yeah. Like you said, sometimes this inner work is not always comfortable. It's oftentimes not. It's oftentimes inviting us to face parts of ourselves or emotions that we've hidden for many years or not wanted to deal with. You talked about shopping as a mechanism or a escape to not have to feel the things that you were feeling or whatever. So again, being able to have the courage to say, you know what? I'm ready. I'm ready to look at this. I'm ready to face myself. And it sounds, and I'm curious for you to elaborate on this, but it sounds like there was just came a tipping point moment where it's, I'm burnt out and I'm not willing to continue life this way. Or what was the moment that you were just like, forget it. I'm just going to face it. I'm going to do this.
Believe it or not, it wasn't one. It was sort of like a trifecta of three, like one right after the other. The first one was I had my first ever anxiety attack on a Sunday night.
Hmm.
I was just laying in bed, and all of a sudden my heart started to just race.
Hmm.
And there was just sort of like this overwhelming feeling of like fear.
Hmm.
And what freaked me out was that it didn't go away in 10 minutes.
Hmm.
It took a good 3 or 4 hours for it to go away.
Hmm.
And I knew what it was. You kind of understand what that sort of like panic attack and anxiety attack is. TV, psych class, but it's the first one I ever had. It freaked me out. And I knew it was just because of my job and just throwing every ounce of energy that I had into my job and trying to get through every project. And I think the second one is, I mean, I love Stevie Nicks. She's everything. And I almost didn't go
Hmm.
to a concert that I had tickets to because it was in the height of the busy season and I just had too much to do. And
Hmm.
thankfully, my husband was like, no, we're going. Who's your favorite? We're going. But even when I got there, I sobbed and cried the entire time because I was just so anxious, overwhelmed, worried that I wasn't going to get everything done that I needed to get done.
Hmm.
And finally, on another Sunday night, I got an email it was a work email, and I just flew off the handle. Like I
Hmm.
ranting, raving, definitely not calm.
Hmm.
And I sort of pulled myself back. And I'm like, oh my God, who are you?
Hmm.
You don't do this. Like you don't snap at people and fly off the handle at an email. This is just crazy. So it was just those three things, one right after the other, of just, this is not working. I don't
Hmm.
know why it's not working. It's not important that I can't put my finger on it right now or give it a name of why it's not working, but it's not working. And it's time to just pull the plug. Like we've tried this a couple times, different jobs, but same sort of, different companies, but pretty much the same job.
Yeah.
and it's just not worked out. So, and also just taking accountability, like all of these situations that have come up, I'm the common denominator here. It's me. So
Mhm.
I need to start figuring out and taking accountability. Okay, what am I not sort of like seeing here?
Mm,
All of these situations, they're not working out because of choices that I'm making,
mm,
not because someone in at that company or that other business just misunderstood me, or I just
mhm.
decided that I just didn't need to be bumped up or promoted. Or it's sort of like taking a step back. You're the only common denominator here. So let's figure out what that is. And just knowing that there was absolutely no way that I would give this the attention that
Mm.
it really needed unless I pulled myself out and sort of eliminated every external person that could maybe tell me that this is not like the most important thing to do.
Mhm. And is that when you quit?
hmm I
Yeah.
mean, I for sure chatted and to try and figure out if there was a way to stay, but in the end, it just wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like you were getting some very loud messages that something is not quite right. And that happens so often. And again, I know it scares people that oftentimes we get the message of what's a no before we get the message of what's a yes. And it requires us to listen to the no first and make space to even begin to receive the messages of what's next. And sometimes those come in a day, a week, sometimes they come in 6 months, sometimes they come in a year. And like I said, it takes a lot of courage to listen to the no when you don't know the yes.
For sure. Again, that type A personality, we always know what the plan is. And we're never in the present because we're always thinking about what's next. So we're always just in the future. We're never just right here in this moment.
Yeah.
And it's tough to realize that I was just never really paying attention to what was going on around me
Mhm.
because I was just focused on what's three steps down the line, how
Yeah.
fast can I get to the end of this?
Yep. 1000%. So I'm curious if we can talk a little bit about coaching. Maybe there's people listening to this who've never experienced it, maybe they have, and just kind of following your journey. I think you said that at that time you weren't necessarily thinking about working with a coach or had ever worked with a coach. Like what brought you, if you kind of continue to walk us through your journey from that moment to the idea or being open to explore help or seek out help? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I had tried, I guess, sort of the traditional therapy a few times, and it never really clicked with me. I knew that if I was going to sort of overcome this mindset that I knew wasn't helping me out in life, I was going to need a little help.
Mm.
And I knew I was trying to find someone, and thank goodness you and I connected. But first, the thought of just knowing that I can't do this on my own,
Mm.
these are habits that are extremely tough to break. I mean, if you were to, let's say you had never worked out in your life, it probably would make sense if you were to join a gym, but then also get a personal trainer for a little while. They're going
Mhm.
to show you how to use the equipment. They're going to figure out what your goals are. They're going to make some recommendations of what you'd like to focus on. This might want to, pull back on the cardio and do more weights, or you want someone that's been through this, is an expert, but also too, especially with a life coach, you've dedicated your life to constantly learning, constantly growing. You're sort of like an Angie's list of what I could do, or like the sort of like practices that I could give a try. I mean, if you were to just Google sort of like books to read, it's overwhelming. It's nice to know that now you and I working together, my personality of what might work better for me. And you can pull it up in your mind. Oh, let's try this first.
Mm.
It's almost like you've vetted all these sort of books and practices and things to try.
Mhm.
And you're able to sort of pick like the top three that we could try, figure out
Mhm.
if it sticks.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. That's so interesting. Of like a Angie's List. It's like a personal development curation library. And it's a great analogy of working with a coach for sure is someone who's likely explored many different modalities, many different things. So instead of you personally having to read 10,000 books and try
Mhm.
10,000 courses, you get to work with someone who's able to, like you said, tailor it to you. So I love that analogy.
And it's also like we're kind of like building like a quilt too. Like I'll take,
Mm.
I mean, we've talked about this, but morning pages from The Artist's Way. that's worked.
Mm.
But then we'll try another. So that's one square of the quilt. And then we'll try something else from another book or another method. And
Mhm.
then that works for me too. So now it's sort of like a patchwork quilt. No one's quilt is going to be the same
Mhm.
because we're all different people. But yeah, it's not having, I mean, one book is not going to be the savior, I don't
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
But yeah, but just picking one thing from here, one thing from there, and
Mhm.
then pretty soon that quilt is built,
Yeah,
sewn
absolutely.
together.
For sure. And while, yes, of course, like personally, and I'm sure every other coach out there has many tools. And ultimately, what I hope one of the biggest ways I can support people is helping you find your inner wisdom. So I'm curious what your perspective of that has been like, of learning to source yourself or transform yourself from the inside out. That's made the biggest difference for you.
I've realized that, I mean, I love writing. It's definitely something I've always wanted to try, but it's been more on that creative realm. And
Mhm.
I've always been in jobs that are numbers, very
Mhm.
analytical. So with this sort of writing and creativity, it's also a way for me to feel feelings and sort of process everything that's kind of going on in this brain of mine.
Mhm.
But when we when I started to sort of like really get into it, I noticed that I would avoid it
Mm.
for weeks at a time. Now
Mm.
making that connection that the reason why I avoid it is because I don't want to feel, or I don't want to come to terms with probably a hard truth that I really do need to. So knowing that in order for me to sort of get in touch with that inner wisdom, I have to write every day.
Mm.
Um, doesn't matter. It's sort of like this is like brushing my teeth now. Like this
Mm.
is how I work out all these sort of like things that are confusing in my mind. And that's how I feel like that's how I'm sort of getting in touch with that inner wisdom too, and being more confident in it, and being able to say, no, this is right for me,
Yeah.
um, instead of waffling back and forth.
Yeah. So it sounds like writing and also having the space, whether through your morning pages or through our sessions and time together, to face those feelings that you've maybe been avoiding, have helped you. Like we've been talking about this whole conversation of have awareness of what's going on internally so that you can see it and not judge it, and also love yourself through it. And then also be able to, through that witnessing, explore a new perspective on how you might want to do things differently or show up for yourself and your life differently.
Absolutely. And I would not underestimate the power of writing. I think once I really got into it and realized how powerful it could be, I mean, just this week, sort of was able to piece together why a certain person was sort of setting me off so much. This particular behavior that just really just rubbed me the wrong way. And finally realizing that the reason why it was rubbing me the wrong way is because I do it too.
Mm. Yeah.
And honestly, being able to sort of let go of, I guess, an anger that I had felt towards them for a very
Mm.
long time,
Wow.
or just feeling I was kind of like done dirty a little bit. Now being able to make that connection, the reason why I was set off so much was because what he was doing is exactly what I do.
Wow. Yeah.
So he was just an interesting mirror
Yeah.
that I was finally able to make sense of the reflection in that mirror.
Wow. 1000%. And for sure, like you said, writing can be so cathartic and healing and allow us to see parts of ourselves that maybe we were trying to brush under the rug or whatever else. So what a beautiful practice that you've
Mhm.
discovered and a powerful realization.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, the last question for about coaching I want to ask you is for anyone who maybe either they haven't experienced coaching or they're thinking about it, like what would you want them to know or what would you want to share with them if they're thinking about exploring this?
You're not going to do the work for me, or your coach is not going to do the work for you. And they're not going to give you the recipe either
Hmm.
for how you sort of get to where you want to go. They're there to guide you,
Mhm.
listen to you, and if you throw out something that you'd like to look into, they'll provide you with some sources, but they're not going to do the work for you. And even showing up for each session, that's not enough. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of work outside of the sessions with your coach that
Hmm.
you really need to sort of understand and embrace. It's not just the 1 hour with the coach.
Hmm.
That, that's definitely a good check-in, and that keeps you accountable to
Mm,
do the things that you say you're going to do. But you really got to lean into the other stuff that you need to do outside of those sessions.
yeah.
And if you're not really ready to, I mean, just showing up for an hour a week, that doesn't do it.
Well, I love that what you just shared as far as the coach is not gonna do it for you,
Mhm.
1000%. I can't do anything for you. I can't do anything for anyone. It's ultimately up to you, like you said, and when you're able to take that personal responsibility and know that, yes, a coach is there to support, is there to guide, is there to help you come up with inspired actions. Ultimately, you're the one living your life, and I can never make choices for you or anybody else. So I think that is a powerful reminder. And I'll share it too. If all you got is right now showing up for that 1 hour session,
Mhm.
beautiful. That's a beautiful space to start. And trusting that the more that you put into this work and give yourself space, like we've talked about in this whole conversation, the power of giving yourself space to do the inner work, the more you get out of it. It's like anything. So, thank you for sharing your experience with all of that and your life and everything else. And if there was one thing that you wanted people to remember from this conversation or you wanted to leave people with, what would that message be?
Doing this work, it's for sure, without a doubt, the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. It's heavy work. I mean, for me, this is what I feel is pretty heavy work. Some days I'm up, some days I'm down. There are these like internal battles going on inside me with that perfectionist wanting to come out and the other side saying, no, 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 it's time for you to rest right now. And let's face it, being out of your comfort zone is
Mm,
uncomfortable. Duh. It can feel challenging and overwhelming too. I think at the end of the day, I've never once wanted to quit,
mm,
ever. And I think that has a lot to do with working with you
mm,
and knowing that, yeah, there's gonna be tough days, but you're this far in. I mean, just keep walking up that mountain.
mm,
I mean, I haven't been to the summit yet, but I heard it's breathtaking and it's beautiful. So I'm
mm.
going up that mountain.
Yeah. So one thing I'm really hearing is if someone's going through something hard right now, to trust that the journey is worth it, to not
Mhm.
give up wherever you're at, wherever you are in your process, whatever you're doing. If you feel like it's really challenging right now, and yet there's something more calling you forward, like that spark we talked about at the beginning, that believing that more is possible and that the journey in and of itself is worth it. And yes, the summit is beautiful. And I'm curious even for you to answer, like, why is this moment beautiful? Like, why is even being in the middle of the hard moments beautiful?
To me, this is where some of the breakthroughs are happening, is when it gets really uncomfortable. If I'm willing to just sit in it and not run away from it, it might happen, in a few minutes or a few days or a few weeks, but that breakthrough will come through,
Yeah.
will happen. And it's a weird feeling. You just feel so much lighter.
Mm,
Some of these like weird things I've tried to make sense of,
mm,
I finally understand it.
mm.
And now I can be a little bit more forgiving of myself, forgiving of others. Yeah. I mean, let's face it. I mean, like evolution is pain. Look at, I mean, butterflies don't in this beautiful little cocoon for a few months and just it's warm and cozy and
Yeah.
it's gooey and slimy and gross in there. Look what happens when you sit in that slime and that goo for a little while. You get a beautiful butterfly.
Yeah. And I heard you say it in different ways throughout this conversation of it sounds like you wouldn't wish away any of these challenges and that they created so much growth. They were catalysts for change. They were catalysts for transformation. And knowing that, and I feel so much about coaching and a message I try to share often is to not, and you talked about not chasing this external validation from anybody. It's not about chasing the mountaintop summit. Yes, enjoy that moment, and it's there's beauty in the grit. There's beauty in like when I don't know how diamonds get polished, but like when pearls get polished with a grain of sand or whatever the analogy is that I'm not thinking of. But it requires, like you said, evolution requires tension. It requires
Mhm.
stretching, like the gym analogy you talked about, metaphor earlier. So yeah, it's a powerful reminder of if it's hard, it's okay. If it's hard, it's
Mhm.
okay, and we can enjoy those moments too.
Exactly. And I think we're almost sort of conditioned that when we feel pain, whether it's emotional or physical pain, it's not safe and we
Yeah.
just want to run away from it.
Yes.
That's not the case here. You wanna sit in it, whether it's just
Yeah.
a hard emotion to feel or it's physically painful in some way. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah. And it's lean in, and it's you've shared different tools, whether writing or working with a coach, having support that have helped you lean into those challenges and make it a little bit feel a little bit easier and a little bit safer to navigate that terrain than it might have before.
I have to say too, I think now that I'm almost a year in, I feel like the last few months have been probably some of the toughest because I
Mm.
think in the beginning you're sort of clearing out what's easiest to clear out. And
Yeah.
that's not that painful.
Mm.
But then once you sort of clear out the little kernels,
Mm.
that's when the big stuff starts to bubble up because
Mhm.
you can it's got some more room to come up.
Mhm.
Um, if I hadn't had someone still encouraging me and supporting me, I know I would have given up.
Mm.
I'm 1,000% sure I would have given up because this is tough. And if I was doing it on my own, it would have been so much easier to say, you know what, we made some progress. We're done. Let's just pick something and move on.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to share too, because sometimes people might feel even shame about that or think, "Oh, I worked with a coach for 6 months, so I should be fixed. I shouldn't need any more support." But like you said, it's like we keep unpacking things, A, and there's always a new thing, a new layer of growth that we wanna get
Mhm.
to. So not to say that you have to work with a coach forever, and I
Mhm.
mean, I do because I love it. It's the modality of my choice. And there's many different ways of support systems that you can surround yourself with, and that's okay. It's like, when do we
It is.
never not want support? I mean, we don't always like, do you quote unquote need it? I mean, questionable, but is it incredibly beneficial and useful and transformative? Yes. So to give yourself that gift and permission, and also not the expectation that there should ever be a point where you're just like, "Oh, everything is perfect. I should be fixed. Like, I should be done by now."
Yeah, no, there's no time. First thing is there's no time limit on this. Like, don't start off and think, oh, I'll be like a new person in 6 months. So throw out any sort of schedules. And coincidentally, when you were talking about this, it kind of hit me. I mean, some of the most amazing athletes in the world are these guys that run 100-mile races, 50-mile races. A lot of them, I think this is more of a North American thing, but a lot of these athletes will have pacers. So they
Mm,
will have someone run with them during the hardest parts
yeah,
of the course because they know they need someone to help them keep running and not give up.
yeah.
So, I mean, if these ultra runners that run like 100 miles in like Death Valley, if they need someone to run with them through the toughest parts, wouldn't you want someone to kind of help,
Yeah.
walk with you through some of these more tougher parts of this journey?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I know I feel like I could talk about this forever, but I feel like there's probably also like stigmas around like mental health or doing this inner work. Like it might seem obvious of sure, I could see why getting a personal trainer at the gym would be useful, and yet we don't see the same for the inner work or think we should do it, should be able to do it ourselves and then get down on ourselves for struggling
Mhm.
with like the mental stuff versus being able to see it all from the same perspective, like the shoes. It's like your brain is a muscle just as much as your biceps are a muscle. And all of these things, they're skills that you can build, you can learn emotional regulation, you can learn how to calm your nervous system, you can learn how to build empowering beliefs. You shouldn't have to expect yourself to have figured that out by yourself. It's like the
Mhm.
athlete and these other people, the coaches helped them, the people around them helped them. So, yeah, I think it's powerful to be able to see it from different perspectives and release any kind of stigma there might be or shame around wanting or asking for help with the inner work.
For sure. I'm not sure if it's maybe a little mix of ego and just thinking like, I should be able to do this on my own. I don't, or ego, I don't need any help. I can figure this out. I think that's probably the biggest sort of hurdle in finally coming to terms with, I do need a little help with this,
Mhm.
especially if you've never really done anything like this before. Why would you try doing it on your own? That's crazy. I mean, would you, if you climbed a mountain, would you just try and do it by yourself, or would you try and get one of those amazing Sherpas to get you to base camp one and then take a rest and then have them help you to base camp two, three, four? It's silly to try and do it on your own if you've never really done it before
Yeah,
or
100%.
committed to doing it before.
Mhm. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I could continue talking forever. And the last question I love to ask, because for me, I feel like so much of following your spark is are following those sparks of curiosity, interest, inspiration. They might make zero sense. I'd love to ask, is there anything you're giving yourself time and space for right now? That's a spark that's just felt like fun or interesting or inspiring that you've just allowed yourself to play in recently?
Well, this is a spark that's just sort of hit me. But again, just finding that I really do love writing. I mean, I wanted to be a copywriter when I was in college, and just abandoned that just because couldn't get a job in copywriting. Just rediscovering that love of writing
Mhm.
now, just writing some little things for myself,
Yeah.
but digging into how I might be able to share this in more of a public way.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the spark is there, and we're sort of fanning the flames. It hasn't turned into a big fire yet, but
Yeah.
that's okay. It's a process, right? It takes time.
Absolutely, and you don't have to know exactly where it's going, and it's beautiful that you're giving yourself the space again, the internal work first of, "Can I just give myself space to write with 0 expectations and
Mhm.
0 needing to figure out where this is gonna go," and trusting that when you make space for that and you keep following a yes and you keep feeding that fire, it will glow brighter and brighter and get clearer and clearer, and you will get little sparks of that guide you towards what's next. So
1,000%. Yeah, and also just learning to hear that inner critic, acknowledge that it's there, but also not let it be the thing that holds you back from continuing to follow
mhm, mm,
what you're curious about. And it doesn't. At the end of the day, anything that you want to explore, there doesn't need to be sort of an outcome, like a purpose. You should be able to just explore something just for the sake of it, trying to be as unattached as you possibly can. And I know that's tough for a type A.
mhm,
Be unattached to what this turns into. It might
mm,
not be anything other than you just gave yourself 4 hours on a rainy afternoon just exploring a bunch of articles on the internet and just going down a little rabbit hole for a little while. It doesn't
yeah,
have to turn into a new career or a new side hustle. Just being unattached to the outcome. So just no desire, just preferences.
yeah, beautiful. I love that final reminder to close us out of, if there's a spark on your heart, can you give yourself space and permission to follow it with 0 expectations, 0 attachment of what it has to be, and just allow yourself the space to play and explore and follow whatever is speaking to your heart in this moment.
Just try on the pair of shoes.
Try on your shoes. Yes, I love it. Well, thanks for wrapping it all up for us in this beautiful way. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you and such a gift to share all of your wisdom.
Thank you so much, Gina. I had such a great time. And thank you so much for the past year. I
Mm,
couldn't have gotten to this place if I had not had you by my side. So
pleasure. My
thank
pleasure.
you so much.